Episode 109, Two Chaps, Many Cultures. So you've landed. You're there. You're in a new place. You don't know anybody. The old-fashioned networking brain might kick in, but there are really good ways, up-to-date ways to do it. And we're going to talk to somebody today to give us a little bit of advice in that area. Stick around. Yes, indeed. You have landed, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, right outside of the Two Chaps Towers, no doubt, hopefully. And
who gave you landing permission? Who gave you permission to land? This is Corona times. We don't let anybody in here.
That's right. Wow. Nobody at all. This is the show of culture, the culture of business and the business of culture. If you like what you hear and see, please comment in the comments below, share it out to your friends, and please subscribe to our YouTube channels.
Yes,
How are you today, sir?
I'm marvelous, splendid, fabulous.
Good to see you again.
I can't believe you landed. You're here.
Right. We did. We got in, we got clearance. It's all good.
We have a few newcomers here. I love it. And when newcomers come here, they are, as you and I know well, they're often overwhelmed with all these new things that they encounter. And then they have to make it work somehow, right? They have to get to work and make it work and put themselves to work. And the phrasing I used for teasing up this episode is, what you know is what got you here. Who you know will determine how much further you'll get. And who you know is the network you build. But now you're abroad and you probably left parts of your network behind because they didn't come with you. They may be with you virtually via the phone and the email, but you're in a new location. You're here on an assignment. You have to build out a new network. How are you going to do this? We have somebody who knows how to do this. Welcome to the Two Chaps Many Cultures studio, live from Toronto, Mr. Brent Edwards. How are you, Brent?
Doing great. Hey. It's so great to see you guys live as much as possible in person. Brett, Christian, thanks for having me on the show.
No problem at all. It's great to have you, sir. And you are coming from good old Toronto, as they say up there, right?
That's right.
How do they
Toronto.
say it? Let's settle this.
Toronto.
Toronto.
I've had to learn how to say it correctly too, because I didn't grow up here. I grew up.
Oh, you didn't?
I spent time in Montreal and I grew up on the West Coast. So I was a newcomer to Toronto a few decades ago, but didn't really know anyone when I got here either.
Toronto. That's interesting. So the second T is silent, just like in the city that I live in, Atlanta. So
yes.
People think it's Atlanta. No, it's Atlanta. Double N.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. It's all those local idioms and local sayings and how to pronounce things. Sure.
So you came from the West Coast. I'm presuming the Canadian West Coast, BC. Yes, I guess. Okay.
That's right.
And you relocated to Toronto and you had to reestablish your own network. And I guess that taught you a thing or two about how to do this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, this is after university. So this is a while ago. But when I moved for work purposes, as many people do. And I had no connections. I knew I had a sister who was in Hamilton who was close by, but that was it. So I guess I learned from the ground up that it was important to network and build relationships and build connections, and I've also had to go through a couple of layoffs in the past decade, as many people have, especially during COVID times, and just learned how important it is to have a strong professional network to achieve your goals.
Now, I may be misconstruing this a little bit. However, my impression of the Canadian labor market or work market is that it's a bit differently handled than here in the United States, where Brett and I live. My impression of the Canadian labor market is that as Canada, as a country, as a society, is embracing truly embracing the fact that it's an immigration country. There are quotas of how many qualified people the country lets in, and there's a desire, it seems to me, of truly integrating the newcomers into Canadian society, mainly via their skills and talents, in order to put them to work properly within a well-designed and intentional network. So is your work, first of all, I applaud your work, because it's super critical to allow newcomers to establish these new roots in their networks. Would you see that as a mission for yourself is this a Canadian mindset to make sure that newcomers are in fact well integrated?
I don't think I'm alone in terms of feeling that this is something really important. If it wasn't for newcomers coming to Canada, our size of our workforce would actually be declining. So the real, any growth in the workforce, because we have an aging population, it really comes from newcomers. There seems to be general support around the value that newcomers can provide. A lot of it is making sure that the newcomers, and I guess for myself, it's around, I'm a very patriotic Canadian. I want the country to succeed. And what's kind of driving me is making sure that we avoid buyer's remorse. We've got people who are economic immigrants who are choosing between many different places they could move and take their talents to. And I feel really strongly that we need to make sure that there isn't a sense of, 5 years after they've arrived that they're disappointed and they should have chosen a different country. So that's really partly what's, driving my mission and urge to help others to succeed, because when they succeed, our country will succeed.
Beautifully said. Now, as I wish I could hear Brett's comments, we can't, because
Sorry,
you're still on mute. The quote of 2020.
Yeah, I was on mute because I was coughing. I'm sorry. No, this is great. That is probably, in a nutshell, one of the greatest ways to invite and promote your country to an potential outside talent pool, which is rich and diverse, and brings a lot of real value to a country, right?
A tremendous amount.
Yeah. You've been doing this for a couple of summers, and extended Canadian winters, I'm suspecting.
Yes, they are. Depending on what part of the country, where I live in Toronto, we're kind of the equivalent of, I think we've been about Orlando in the States. We're in the far south of Canada. So, but again, most of us live in southern Canada. So,
yeah, many
a lot of Canadians in Orlando.
What I'm curious about, Brent, is, have you seen the places of origin from where people come to Canada? Has there been shifts over the course of your career? Is there any big trends, or has it always been a mixed bag?
There's always been a diverse people coming from diverse regions of the world. In terms of economic upheaval and wars and famine, and that's probably have driven some of the refugees that are coming to the country, especially what happened in Syria and the Syrian refugees coming to the country. A lot of the people that I end up working with are economic class immigrants, so they have had to go through a scoring process, and based on their skills that they come with, those are the people that I feel I'm in the best position to help with in terms of their career or for them starting a business. What we've seen, I think, in the last few years, there's a large percentage of newcomers in those categories who come from China and the Indian subcontinent. And I think just in terms of language skills, I do quite a bit of my connections are with people who have connections to the subcontinent.
Okay, so this brings us to the question of how does culture play a role in all this, right? So building a network is fine and dandy, and if you're good at what you do, and if you have some entrepreneurial or industrial spirit, then you will discover for yourself to varying degrees the necessity of networking. However, if you're doing this outside of your native culture, that is a completely different ballgame, right? So how is that, or how would you describe that from a Ontarioan is that the
Ontarian.
Ontarian, from an
Yes.
Ontarian perspective? So when people come from China, from India, from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from Africa, how do you advise these newcomers as to what Toronto is like, how to do business in Canada, and what are the things that they need to be aware of?
Sure. So maybe I'll just share an example with you. I did a number of segments for an organization called New Canadians TV. They have a major website to help newcomers integrate and come to Canada. Great support and help, and they have a TV show. So I did a couple of segments for them around networking for newcomers. And the woman who was interviewing me was actually a former business host on TV in Delhi, in India. And we were having a conversation about networking, and I was talking about, it's around, you need curiosity, and you really need to have a game plan before you go to a networking event, whether online or in person. And you're really there to build relationships. And is interesting what she said to me. She says, "So you mean that networking is not transactional?" And I said, yes, it's for the long term. And then I talked to her afterwards, and I've talked to other people. Again, she was from India, and that's one of the things that I've discovered, and I guess I've learned. Again, India is such a complex country, languages, religions, it's so many different microcosms, but this transactional nature. And I think part of it is for her experience coming to Toronto, even though Toronto is the biggest city in Canada, the economic hub of the country, pace of life is slower than the people who are coming here. And that's where the relationships, we have 37 million people versus 1.3 billion, and this networking is not transactional kind of stuck with me as something to keep in mind and to share when I'm coaching people.
Yeah. So how often do when we hear people talk about networking, I mean, the old-fashioned, it's old-fashioned, it's not old-fashioned, it's probably still relevant. But you get this kind of idea that a networking session is a very hyper, compacted process where you've got nothing but a short amount of chance to get as many cards into the hands of people.
Yes.
You've got to try and you've got to have an elevator pitch, the old elevator pitch.
Yes.
So
Yes.
You do that, and you're right. And I've done business in Canada, and it is even completely different from this side of the border, right? Where you've got this very kind of hyper. And I just went through a process of assessing platforms for virtual conferences because of the situation we're in at the moment. And I found that many of those platforms that were produced and created by North Americans, pretty much majorly the US people, the networking part of that was that kind of one-on-one speed dating type of thing. But when they're created by other people from other cultures, it's more relationship. There's the importance of it. Even reflects it on the online community. There's the more importance about spending time with a larger group of people, getting to know them, getting the idea of connecting to them, with the assumption that, as to your point, it's a longer term scenario.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of it's showing itself through the technology, and I think a lot of platforms are still struggling with how to replicate this in-person contact. But I think part of it comes back to in terms of the strategy and why you're doing the networking and what kind of opportunities avail themselves. So in a normal year in Toronto, there's about 25,000 networking opportunities or networking events, and there's about 8,000 in Toronto itself. So part of it is actually choosing the events you want to go to, and some of them are designed for entrepreneurs, and some of them are designed for job seekers. Some of them are part of trade shows and conferences. So part of it's actually figuring out which event you want to go to. But I think the other thing I've learned is you don't want to make assumptions about the people that you're meeting. So some people come in, those are focused on like, I need to meet a person who's a vice president in this particular sector or industry. And one thing to keep in mind in terms of this curiosity mindset that I emphasize is you don't know who the people, you probably don't know the people who they are now. You don't know who they were. You don't know who they're going to become. And you actually don't know who else they know. So it's really important that when you're thinking about who you're connecting with, that you also look at people who you may not have considered, who are outside of your network. I use an example around a stock portfolio. So if you had a stock portfolio of your key contacts and your relationships back in, let's say the end of February of this year, and most of them potentially, maybe they were in like the hospitality, the cruise industry, entertainment, tourism, which, is an area I've been involved in the past. So it's what we call like a beach, the beach stock. So if you had almost all your contacts were in those industries, and then you accelerate now, and here we're at the beginning of December, those stocks in terms of their value in their sectors have definitely declined. And it's really talks to, you need to diversify who your network is in terms of your future, so you kind of future-proof your careers and also your business.
Interesting aspect. Never thought of it that way, but there's some validity here. I'm just thinking about this. This is good.
So, isn't it also good to learn a lot about hockey?
Well, as you can tell by up here, I'm a hockey fan. Yes, I've got my hockey book down here, but I am a Canadian Football League fan. So, but that comes back to like culture and idioms. Like there's a lot of the folks I've met from, again, the subcontinent. I remember going to a Blue Jays game with them and trying to explain baseball to them, and then they explained cricket to me, and I realized that baseball was kind of checkers and cricket was more.
I guess you don't have soccer in Canada, do you?
Oh, we do. We have a pretty good soccer team too. But again, it's those idioms, those cultural differences. Those are things that people didn't grow up with, that they need to kind of immerse themselves into so they can have small talk and break the ice with people who are strangers and normally they wouldn't have maybe spoken to were in their home country.
How do you, in your organization, and we see it there behind you, it's called Brent Canada. I like that. It almost sounds like it's an oiling or a mining operation, because it also looks so solid. So, and you see the handshake. I love the branding is awesome. Brent Canada. How do you measure success? How do you know, or how do the newcomers know they've succeeded in building those networks? What are some of the benchmarks for you?
Yeah, it's a good way of pointing out. Some of it, there's some basic, I guess, KPIs in terms of, the number of connections that people have had. But some of it's quantitative, some it's qualitative, right? So quantitative, like how many LinkedIn connections do I have? How many events have I attended? How many one-on-one conversations have I had? But I think some of it's also quantitative, which are a little harder to measure in terms of personal growth. So some of it is actually the level of confidence they have entering into conversation with people they've never met before. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the three of us, we've had, a single conversation before our call today, even though, I've been following you online for several months, and great show, and happy to be on. But it's, it's the depth of those relationships, and it's the comfort and confidence that people feel in being able to enter the relationships and speak with confidence. So if you were to say, well, you haven't been successful if you haven't gotten your dream job, but it's, have you been able to build out your network and people know enough about you that they might actually be able to refer you to someone else? Mm-hmm. I think that's another way of kind of starting to measure some success.
Would it be safe to say that from a macroeconomic perspective, if you look, you said you're a proud Canadian and you want your country to succeed or be attractive or be competitive, right? So in order to attract immigrants, highly skilled immigrants, or even attract foreign investment, right? Would it not help to showcase, hey, we have people from various diverse backgrounds who have climbed the rungs of corporate responsibilities, or here immigrant founders, refugee founders, maybe startups, to showcase this as a success of your work?
Absolutely. So there's some organizations that are already doing some great things around that. There's an immigrant magazine that was started about 20 years ago by a newcomer. They've actually come up with the top 25 immigrants of Canada each year. So it's an annual awards that they provide. There's organizations like the Toronto Region Immigrant Economic Council, TRIAC, who does a lot of great benchmarking reports and analysis in terms of the success of immigrants, starting with the Greater Toronto Area, but now going nationally. So a lot of it is, are you seeing newcomers in senior leadership positions? Are you seeing newcomers on boards of directors? A lot of newcomers are starting up businesses that are, again, hiring newcomers and established Canadians like myself. So there is a lot of good research that's being done across the country, and there is a way of recognizing success in business, and whether it's business, public sector, private sector, that's something again I could build on, but some of that's already being done to a great extent.
Good. I figured. Now, Brett and I, we are suckers for nuance, and obviously we have our fun with national stereotypes, and especially when it's stereotypes about our own passport countries.
Yes.
We're no strangers to self-deprecation.
Yes.
However, we're also, in a more serious aspect, fans of nuance, and Canada is not one homogenous culture. Toronto is arguably one of the most diverse places in the Americas, at least in my experience, and coast to coast, it's a huge country, right? So how would you, and being a transplant yourself, so how would, for an outsider who doesn't know this, and I'm talking to one of my clients who's now bringing somebody over from Europe to be working in the Toronto area soon, how do you explain to outsiders the nuanced differences between, let's say, British Columbia and Ontario, or Newfoundland?
Oh, for sure. There's huge variations, and you've got, there's national differences, local differences. There's a corporate culture in terms of the companies you're joining have a big impact. So if I was to compare, so Vancouver and Toronto are probably the two cities I know the best. Vancouver, again, this is pre-COVID. Vancouver, if you got friends together and you said, we're going to go do something, you do it outside. There are 17 beaches in Vancouver that you would go to. There's so many amazing parks. There's skiing, there's sailing, there's all kinds of things. But it's an outdoors oriented, get out and embrace nature place. If you were to do that in Toronto, people would go, okay, so which restaurant are we going to go to? Which neighborhood are we going to hang out? Which club are we going to go to? It's a very indoors. Which movie are we going to see? It's a very indoors oriented city. But again, it's like comparing, if you're comparing the U.S., it's comparing like Seattle and New York City. So Toronto's kind of I think Peter Ustinov said Toronto was New York run by the Swiss. So I'm not sure if that's still, again, that was in the 70s. Toronto's had a number of reputations. Toronto the Good, they used to roll up the sidewalks, but that again was, 40 years ago. And the city is so much more dynamic, even since I got here, which was about 30 years ago. And then Newfoundland and Labrador. It was its own country. It was a separate colony, joined in 1947. Probably half the comedians in Canada have some connections back to the Rock. So, I think the humor aptitude of Canadians, or humor intelligence scale, probably about doubled, thanks to all the Newfoundlanders who've added to our humor and unique perspectives on the country.
There might be a theory that rough climates make for humorous people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So I mean, there's lots of information you are sharing with the newcomers coming to your area, but we're going to boil it down to like a simple headline. What's the number one tip for, especially for people that come from cultures that are non-majority white? So I'm excluding North America and Europe now. So if we're looking at Asia, Africa, parts of South America, what will be the number one tip that you would give newcomers to Canada or to the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area?
Yeah. I think it'd be a combination of curiosity and realizing that you have a tremendous amount of value to bring to the table. So I've listened to some of your prior episodes where you've talked about personal distance and hierarchies and the way the organized and way cultures are set up. Our culture, speaking about Toronto, it's there's still hierarchy there. There's people with different roles and different levels of power and influence in that. But really, any of the conversations, really, you're coming in as a peer. Some Canadians have worked overseas. A lot of them have not. So anyone who's coming to our country actually has a unique advantage because they've worked internationally. And a lot of these economic immigrants have worked in many different countries, across many different cultures, different political systems, legal systems, economic systems. And when you're coming in, again, it's maybe a bit of a stretch for some of them, but it's putting yourself out there, realizing that you have a lot of value to add. And it's kind of dealing with this being from a culture where you're being very deferential, which is not the case here. You need to be deferential in certain circumstances, but when you're networking, you're a peer, you can add a lot of value. And there's a lot of ways that so it's really, if you're going into a networking event, think about how you can help others. So I love, so Jerry Maguire, I love that movie.
Show me the money.
A bit. Show me the money. But it's the line I love the best is "Help me help you." So as a newcomer, people want to generally help. They want to be helpful, but they need to know how they can actually help you. So I would say, keep in mind, help me help you.
I love that.
Yeah,
awesome.
So it really is the connectedness, which again speaks to some of those. I mean, a lot of those cultures. These are cultures that live and breathe by relationship and the ability to even have other people as advocates for them. So I guess if you say to somebody, "How can I help you?" they get that kind of tickles their ego a little bit and say, "Well, that's great. Maybe you can. Maybe I can. Then it becomes a very collaborative two-way street and a nice neat Venn diagram where there's some kind of crossover.
It's 100% about reciprocation. It's just you don't know when they're going to be able to help you or you're going to be able to help them. It may be next week, maybe next year, it may be several years. But people do feel a sense of obligation, and if someone has helped someone, they want to be able to help you back. It's not transactional, it's not on a timeline, but it really drives a lot of the relationships, at least in the culture I'm part of.
And what I found very inspiring was how you phrased it, or how you frame it, as newcomers bringing a value to the established society that they're entering.
Absolutely.
And this is a perspective that isn't always taken by a lot of people. I see it here in the US, I see it in Europe, where newcomers sometimes carry that stigma of and it's a stigma of refugee or migrant, or people with a migrant background. So they're leaving their established places to go somewhere else. What was wrong where they came from? Why do they have to come to where I am? So this is the othering part. And they're sometimes seen as petitioners or somebody who is of lesser value than the established community. And driving home that point and taking that perspective, hey, you come here and you took maybe great risk, or you had to endure much hardship to get here, and you managed to get through our vetting process, which is, from what I hear, quite rigorous in Canada. So you have value. This is a psychological, not only trick. This is a milestone in order to succeed in life, right? If we're telling them, oh well, you're a petitioner, you want something from us, and maybe if I feel so inclined, I'll give you the opportunity. No, you come here with a distinct set of values, skills, and talent.
We need them.
Yeah.
We need them for our economy to survive, and absolutely. And I think that the challenge is, it's people get their hopes up when they come, right? Because they've gone through a vetting process and they know that they add value. It's just once they arrive, like you said off the top, it's who they know, but it's also who knows them. So they need to get more people to know them,
right?
Because yes, you can know a lot of people, but unless they're aware of who you are, I guess it all comes down to like human potential, right? And when any of us see potential that's been wasted or not fully realized, I think that's something that it's kind of a human nature thing that we all feel frustrated by. So we all want people to help reach their potential, and especially when you've moved your family halfway around the world, probably come with very little in your pockets, no connections, and like the number one barrier to career success we found is lack of established professional network. So when you've given all that up to come here, it's really, I think, our obligation as citizens to do whatever we can to help you succeed, because when the newcomers succeed, the country succeeds.
Well, speak a little bit, and Christian most rightly pointed it out. The nuance is perfect, and I've done a lot of business in Canada, and I also have a lot of clients going to and from there.
Sure.
This idea that I actually feel when I visited Toronto a lot, but it's.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to have, and all of these great people I've done business with have this same sense of sarcastic view of the world that us Aussies have, right? So this is where I have an affinity with Canadians that might not land so well. That sarcasm doesn't land so well in this very kind of literal use here in the US, So that can be very confronting for people. But can you speak a little bit? Have you noticed, do you bring any of that up about how people should, especially from other cultures where they're not quite sure about those personal interactions and where that comes in?
Yeah, I think I see that a lot of times with the clients. So they will make assumptions about Canada and, of course, any place that you're moving to. And I think that because the differences are subtle, it's something that people don't pick up on. And okay, so an example would be, why do Canadians say they're sorry all the time? So, I mean, the joke is you're on the Toronto Transit Commission and someone steps on your foot and you say sorry to them. It's like, why do we do that? But we do it all the time. And again, maybe it's more Toronto versus something like Toronto is a polite city. In terms of friendly, not so much. But again, it's a big city, right? But it's that, like, I think one thing I notice that my clients struggle with is a couple things. It's like, why are Canadians so focused on including others and not giving offense? Those are kind of a couple things that they get very confused about, because it's a more indirect culture than some other cultures you're familiar with. But I think part of it is also people need to understand a bit about the history, the politics, the geography of the country, what challenges we've had over the years in terms of the different regions. And it's a very, very tricky country to govern. But it's also because of the different regions of the country and how they operate. And unless you understand kind of a bit of the political and historic background, I think otherwise it's just rules, but you don't understand why the rules in place. Why do people do this? And when you look at founding cultures, we have the indigenous people who've been here for tens of thousands of years, French culture, you've got the British culture a lot with the Scots, basically the Scots and the French were the main settlers. You've got a whole part of Western Canada, which, having lived out there, there's always some tensions with kind of the Montreal-Toronto corridor, the bilingual nature of the country in Quebec, and some of the separatist referendums we've gone through without getting a lot of detail, but those kind of drive also the psyche of how people interact for business. And I think unless you understand some of those historical contexts, I think it's kind of confusing why we do what we do.
Yeah. I mean, this is more a bit tongue-in-cheek, and I'm not saying it was a great show, but there was this, I think it was a movie or TV show about a good cop, bad cop, a Canadian.
Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, there's a good cop, bon cop, bad cop, I think.
Yeah, bon cop, bad cop, and was the francophone detective and the anglophone detective, and they had to solve a case together, and those clashes erupted throughout the program. It is very, I mean, it harped on those stereotypes. However, if you're completely unfamiliar with the dynamic in Canada, I think that might be at least an entry level as to familiarize yourself with that.
Yeah, I would. I mean, there's other things like, if you want to watch something a little more historic, there's a Canadian Film Board, a short film about a book by Roch Carrier called The Hockey Sweater, and it talks about the rivalry between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Habs fan, but it talks a bit about some of the dynamics of the country, and you've got, because we're in this kind of northern, somewhat harsh climate, you've got to kind of bond together, and there's a lot of people need to make concessions and they need to compromise in order to collaborate, and it's built a very strong country, but there is concessions and collaborations that are needed to accommodate the differences from all the way from Vancouver Island to the Avalon Peninsula in Newfoundland, Labrador, and all the way up to Alert in Nunavut. It's like there's a lot of internal differences, like in any country, whether the United States or in Germany or Australia. But it's understanding the nuances and why we do what we do is really important for newcomers to help them succeed and to have good conversations with other Canadians.
This is very insightful, Brent. And the one, I mean, there were many takeaways, but the one that I would like to close it off with was what you said earlier. If the newcomers succeed, we as a country succeed. And this is something that you have my full support on that. I love that. It's a great mindset to have, and it's also one that is geared towards success in the future and not being hung up or held back by limitations that we may have felt or actually had in the past. So thank you for joining us today, Brent. This was excellent.
Christian, Brett, it was a pleasure. It was great to get to know you guys better.
That was great. And where do we get in touch with you, Brent?
So if you go to my website, networkingfornewcomers.ca.
Perfect.
Excellent. Networkingfornewcomers.ca, right?
Yes.
All right. Not .com, .ca. Get it right, people.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Brent. Two Chaps, many cultures. We'll see you again tomorrow, maybe, Brett. What do you think?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Brent. Good to see you, mate.
Good to see you, too. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.